Hello there my Jedi and Sith friends, and welcome back to another very exciting Star Wars video. This is not one I thought I'd be making today, but Leslye Headland, creator of the Acolyte, has just confirmed a major fan theory that I put forward just over a year ago, just before the show came out. Now I'm certainly not the only person who had this theory or made this connection, but I was one of the very first to make a video about it, and to go deep into how it could work. So in a new preview for the upcoming Art of the Acolyte book, Leslye says that Qimir was not intended to be a run-of-the-mill Sith. He was supposed to be the founding member of the Knights of Ren, a century and a half before we see them in canon, and this information comes mere months after the visual guide implied that Plagueis was not Qimir's master. The two characters were not connected. The reason Plagueis was interested in Qimir and watching him from a distance is because the helmeted stranger was borrowing practices of the Sith, but not officially part of the Rule of Two, and as the visual guide states, Qimir was an imposter, powerful in the dark side of the Force, but not part of the Sith religion. Plagueis, who was curiously watching from the shadows, was being set up to be the stranger's opponent, and had the show not been cancelled, had they made a second and even third season, we might have witnessed how this conflict would have gone down, with Plagueis coming out on top, defeating Qimir. And we know Plagueis can't die, because he goes on to train Palpatine. Essentially, my friends, Qimir was a former Jedi, drawing upon the dark side but combining different traditions, and this cocktail of borrowing from different beliefs was meant to form the foundation of the Knights of Ren. Qimir was meant to be the first Ren, and Leslye Headland now confirms it. Up until this point, there has been nothing established in the new canon about how the Knights began. There have been some allusions to their origins and their formation, but nothing concrete about a specific date or if they originally formed as an offshoot of the Sith. The first time timeline-wise that they're mentioned is between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but their origins go way back, and the first original iteration of them might have been very different to what we see in the comics and the sequel trilogy. Even their name might have been different, but Qimir would have been the original Ren, even if he didn't call himself that. And did you know, my friends, there were several hints in the Acolyte connecting him to the group? The most defining feature, which everyone spoke about, was his helmet, being heavily inspired by Kylo Ren. I mean, people were literally calling him Smilo Ren, and we even hear Kylo's theme being played in the background a couple of times. So I believe it was always intended to be a deliberate, artistic choice. So here are Leslye Headland's new comments in the Art of the Acolyte book. It felt like it foreshadowed a possible connection to the Knights of Ren, with the Kylo Ren helmet shape we landed on. We just started to go in that direction. It was in the character's design, as well as knowing that we were going to introduce Darth Plagueis, who would eventually end up with Palpatine as his apprentice. And by the way, my friends, it sounds to me like if they had stuck to the 3-season arc, we would have eventually seen young Palpatine, especially if there was going to be a time jump. And then she says, to separate Qimir from the line of the Sith, the stranger was going to be the first Knight of Ren, part of a Sith-adjacent cult that we know eventually survives. So there you have it, my dear friends, confirmation that the origins of the Knights of Ren lie in Qimir and the desire to emulate the Sith. He was seen as an imposter, and that's the reason Darth Plagueis was following him. And if this is true, everything we thought we knew about the Knights of Ren is flipped on its head. Everything they believed, their Force philosophy, their values, what they worshipped, originates with the stranger, because their teachings were so close to the Sith, but have certain attributes that with hindsight, match Qimir's outlook on life. If you guys remember in the Acolyte, Qimir speaks the Sith code. He values the passion and freedom part, but I have a feeling he finds the Sith too restrictive, because Qimir's philosophy is far more individualistic. He kind of mimics the ways of the Sith, drawing upon the dark side, taking on an apprentice, but he's far more liberal in his interpretation of the code. And this is where the origins of the philosophy of the Knights originates. Qimir's outlook is more personal, seeing the Force as freedom, not just a path to domination, but personal liberation. Freedom from the rigidness of the Jedi and the Sith, allowing for individual exploration and a rejection of Sith absolutism. So if we compare this to the later philosophy of the Ren, you will notice a few similarities. According to canon, generations later, the eventual way of the Knights of Ren is defined as follows. The Ren doesn't stop to worry about what it's burning or the right or wrong of it. The Ren just is. It lives and it consumes, and it doesn't apologize. It is its nature and nothing else. The Ren believes in that principle deeply and dedicates their life to it. And this idea of burning, of consuming, of taking without apologizing or considering the morality behind it, mirrors Qimir's view of the Force. He literally expressed he wants to wield power with no restrictions. No rules attached, just freedom to pursue raw dark side energy. I think he was so traumatized being a former Jedi, being a Padawan under Venestra Rowe, that now he's literally as averse as you can get to following any kind of structured code. The mantra of the Ren sounds like it could have originated with the stranger. And did you know there is another breadcrumb in the Crimson Reign comics, which take place just before episode 6? This is where Qi'ra from Solo a Star Wars Story tries to wage a war against Palpatine. If anyone despised the Sith, it's her. And having been trained by Maul, who of course was chucked aside by Sidious, Qi'ra had an extra sense of vengeance, just an extra bite, outside of her own motivations as leader of Crimson Dawn. But that subplot aside, one of the groups Qi'ra conscripted were the Knights of Ren, and they were described in an interesting way by the mysterious archivist. She says they're brutish and terrible, but one of the few Force groups who survived after Order 66, and perhaps the only one sufficiently proud, strong, and foolish to directly defy the Sith. Something must have happened a long time ago that distinguished the Knights from other dark side groups. Given Leslye Headland's new words, this must have been when the actual Sith clashed with the Knights, or the original Ren. Now even if Qimir died at the hands of Plagueis, you would assume their duel would have gone down as a Knights of Ren legend, and would have made the Knights hate the Sith as a separate group. But their history with the Sith is complicated, because on the one hand they clashed with Darth Vader, they helped Qi'ra, but on the other hand they served Kylo Ren, who was trying to emulate Darth Vader. In The Rise of Skywalker, after parting ways with Kylo Ren, they literally served Palpatine, the revived Emperor. So their motivations can seem a bit confusing, and one of the upcoming issues of the Legacy of Vader comics is actually going to explain the reason they ended up serving Sidious. But you have to understand, whether it's Vader, Kylo Ren, Palpatine, it's not that they were unconditionally loyal, it's more that they were opportunistic. But I guess priorities, values, and survival would have changed from one generation of Knights to the next. And in the book Secrets of the Sith, it's noted that Palpatine believed that the Knights were jealous of them. They wanted their position of authority, but at the core of the Knights of Ren's philosophy was their willingness to do anything to survive. They lived a flexible lifestyle, doing whatever they pleased, and this sounds a lot like someone we know from the Acolyte. So how would things have gone if Leslye Headland was able to do seasons 2 and 3? I think eventually Qimir was meant to die, and it stands to reason if he met his fate at the hands of Plagueis and Osha wasn't there fighting with him, she would have been the one to become the next Ren, because she was Qimir's acolyte and took on the persona of Ren and the helmet. She might have passed it down, and for generations there was an evolving movement of different Ren iterations, but they all began with Qimir. There is already an original Ren in canon, but it's been suggested a few times in the comics that even he had predecessors. And it's also worth noting that while Ren is a title, it's also the way the Knights refer to the leader's lightsaber. It was emblematic of the Dark Master, and its adherents were considered enlightened darkside users. It therefore goes to reason, my friends, if the Acolyte wasn't cancelled, we would have had the revelation that Qimir was not a true Sith, but drew upon their passion for a different path that would become known as the Ren. It's right here in black and white in the new book. So for all we know, because Disney canon is flexible with dates, Darth Tenebrous might still be around. But I guess it also begs the question, why was the show marketed as Sith-oriented? I understand those who say the show works on a technicality that the word Sith is never mentioned once, and those who confronted Qimir all died, but now it seems like for the show to have any Sith connection, other than peeping Plagueis, it would have had to have had a season 2. I was not a fan of season 1, but I have to admit, if they did something with Plagueis, and they did something more with Qimir, his philosophy, the origins of the Knights of Ren, I would be on board. But what do you guys think? Share your thoughts in the comments down below, my dear friends. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, check me out on socials. Have a great day, may the Force be with you, always.